rocking and rolling. Coach Yorgi, what are we taking a look at today?
Good day, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well today. Ryan and I are going to review another chess original, American original, Gary Pillsbury, a great chess player of his time, which would be the
Pillsbury,
late.
like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
That's right. It's like the Pillsbury Doughboy. One of the earlier American chess legends. He's probably not quite at par with Bobby Fischer, but definitely was one of the greatest players of his time. And in fact, he won the greatest chess tournament in his time that was actually played in England. And if you can actually look at the field that he competed at and prevailed, you will see why we say that it was such a great achievement. He was actually ahead of all the world chess champions of the time. I'm trying to look at my screen here. You can see that tournament and the table that he played.
I can't,
Here,
I can't, I can't see it.
what's that?
I can't see it because we're looking at my screen.
Oh, bummer. Yeah. How about you? Well, actually, it's just something maybe for somebody who is interested. The 22 players in that tournament: Lasker, Taras, Steinitz, Dakeman, Schlechter, all the great players of the time. And he was ahead of them 16 and a half points out of 21. So it was a spectacular tournament
Yeah.
victory with three losses to Chigorin, Lasker, and Schlechter, and just gazillion wins. Really great chess player.
What was the name
And
of the tournament?
Hastings, 1895.
Okay, nice.
So I want to review a game that Pillsbury won. And one of the reasons I want to review it is because one of the things that took place in this game, he executed an attack on the king side with a play that later in chess literature had been a reference to as Pillsbury Knight.
Okay.
He was the player that invented this idea of the outpost on d5 in Queen's Gambit. On e5, I'm
E5.
sorry. So you can see that in this position here. What does white usually play traditionally? White plays something like Queen c2, and black plays something like h6. The bishop retreats, knight bd7, castle, c5, rook fd1, and so on. So it is a very complex position with, very complicated setup and positional play mostly. Now, what Pillsbury did in this game, he actually executed the kingside attack, which is not very easy to do. And objectively, this was probably not the best play in the position, but he certainly played this in a way that made it memorable. And the technique of installing the knight on e5 and supporting with the pawn f and d definitely remains in chess and is played from time to time. So in this position, he played knight to e5.
Well, this is great because I played the Queen's Gambit. That's interesting to know about. I didn't know that was a decent idea.
Yes, and the idea here is to support this with the pawn. Now, what's the point? The point being is that eventually White's probably going to play the queen up to f3, and after that, he is very likely to continue with maybe queen h3, aiming at d7, f6, and h7 all at the same time.
Let's see some arrows. We got to see some arrows of that.
Errors, for instance, let's say, I mean, I'm doing something basic. What happened in the game was c5, and then castle.
Wait, no, we got to see some arrows. That sounded really cool. So you said he's thinking about going right here, here, aiming at D7 and H3, right?
H7, yes.
H7. Okay, those are his attack points. Cool.
That's one of the ideas. Now, the second idea would be actually playing rook to f3,
Mm-hmm.
and then to h3 with
Nice.
potential sack on h7. So that's what the Pillsbury Knight idea is. Just for those of you who want to know how to defend against this, generally speaking, the best way to defend against pretty much any attack in chess is to attack back or take some measures that prevent your opponent on setting up the ideal position. So you probably want to do potentially something like knight e4. That way you shut down the bishop right away, therefore attacks on h7 are hard to do, and then, offering them a trade that's going to water down all of their ambitions pretty much. Once that's done, you can kind of see that, even though white still has that knight on e5, the impact of that piece on the game is nowhere near the same. You can clearly see that there's a lot of defensive opportunities, anything from supporting the knight again to even doing something more drastic like playing f5. And yes, the knight on e5 is there, but it can actually be traded for black knight on d7. So you can actually easily take that guy here, and the impact of the attack on the king side is minimized. So in the later years, after this game was played, a lot of players concluded that this is probably the best way to start it, actually, because that way you control e4 and making all these trades a little bit less possible. But obviously, at the time the game was played, this was a revolutionary idea itself. So what happened here, black played c5, white castle. And again, here, knight e4 at some point would have been a best defense. Instead, this player, Georg Marko, also probably one of the top 20 players at the time, played c4 and then a6. It seems like a healthy idea. You want to play b5 and then b4 and potentially develop the c pawn as a pass pawn on the queen side.
Sure.
But you can now see how this Pillsbury attack and Pillsbury Knight on e5 continue. Queen goes to f3.
So if this Pillsbury Knight is so good, then how come we don't just eliminate it? Why don't we just take it out?
That's not necessarily a bad idea, but you also have to keep in mind that after that, let's say you take, there are a couple of possibilities. They can take with a d pawn or they can take with an f pawn. Taking with the f pawn opens up the f file and attack on f7. Taking up with the d pawn open up a possibility of winning the e5 pawn. Let's say we take with the d pawn, for example. Where does the knight go? Can the knight go to e4 here? Yes and no, and you can see that in this position here, we can probably do something like this. Bishop takes e7. What happens here? Well, let's say knight tries to do the same, right?
Okay.
That's the classical tactic here. Check. And you say, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm taking my queen away from your attack.
Oh, cool. How about that? Yeah.
And then boom, your queen is gone.
Nice.
A cute little tactic, right? And in this position here, if you don't take on c3, then you have to take on e7. But then after knight takes d5, it might look like you're losing some material here. The queen is under attack. E4 is under attack. You probably have to take. Queen takes back. The knight is under attack. You have to retreat. You lose a second pawn. So you lost 2 pawns, and things are looking pretty rough.
Not so easy to exterminate that Pillsbury Knight. Yeah. Okay.
Not so easy, yeah. If you can't go to e4, then the options are to go back to e8. But then again, you have defense of d5 that's going to be weakened by departing queen. I don't know, this is actually equally good because here there's move queen c5 available, and potentially that's going to be kind of tricky to navigate because we can't play e4. Right. So maybe we can't really do this. But there's other things we can do. For instance, we can actually play rook f3 with the idea of bishop h7 and queen h5.
Sure.
Or we can play queen h5, force g6, and then play queen h6, and then threaten rook f3. So there's a variety of things available here. Like if you look at this position, you can clearly see that even though material is even, black is on the defensive, and rook f3 is a fairly serious potential threat. Like say you try to attack the pawn, rook f3 anyway, and then you don't have time to play d4 because after rook h3, your threat was made on h7.
Oof.
So I guess to summarize, yes, you can take on e5, but you have to be mindful of what happens to the d5 pawn after d takes e5. So that's
Makes
why
sense.
knight e4 earlier would have been much easier to deal with for black.
Makes sense. Thank you.
So after a6, queen f3, now knight e4 is going to be even more challenging to do. Pawn went to b5, and queen went to h3. And now there are several threats. One of them, and the most unpleasant one, is knight takes on d7. Why would this be a good move? Well, let's say g6 is not played. Let's say he continues with his plan on d4. Can you do that? Can you do that? Can you do that? No. Knight takes d7. Now what do? You take on d7 with the queen. Aside from the fact that simple take on d7 and bishop e7 is pretty strong, also this kind of stuff is very, very difficult to
Oh, wow. How about that? Yeah.
knight takes and queen takes d7. A cool tactic. And if you don't take, well, what do? King h8, bishop f5. Another one bites the dust.
Kapow.
Queen is lost. So you can see there's a lot of challenges here with multiple squares attacked by different pieces.
Right.
So we can't play before. Now, what should have been done? I suspect here black should have just bitten the bullet, and I thought that maybe this would be a good move, trying to eliminate the knight again and then play knight e4. So definitely possible, definitely possible. But if you actually look at this position here, you could see some drawbacks of this as well. What computer thinks about this? I would guess that e4 pawn once again is going to be pretty difficult to protect. If I just simply
This looks bleak for black. Yeah.
here, and then maybe eventual rook f4 is just going to win this thing, but the computer says a3, a3, and let's say rook a to e8, trying to play f6 at some point. Rook f2, f6. And the computer values this in basically almost like 2-point lead, which is a little unusual, but I suppose the weakness of the pawn and e4 combined with passed pawn protected and all that business makes it very difficult for black to defend the position.
Looks like he's holding. How does white win this?
Great question. Great question. I think one of the things that, let's say what he considers here is h6, right? Just making a pawn space. Sure. Says rook f5. Now rook e5 becomes a threat. What do? Let's say you bail. Rook c5 or rook e5. Queen f7. And then h3. You can see he basically surrounded the pawn, and it's just a matter of time before the pawn falls.
I'm not convinced. Okay, rook e8.
A fair move. A fair move. Takes, and I was actually thinking d5, but the computer thinks queen d6 is even better.
Looks like it changed my last second. It said d5 might even be better, yeah. But queen d6, okay. So then let's see here. Queen c6.
Queen c6. Okay, in that case, probably queen e7. I don't want to trade queens. Just want to play d5.
All right, a5. I'm going to storm you on the queen side here.
Storming the barricades. Okay, d5.
Okay.
Actually, the computer says queen d8 check. It's more precise, not letting you play queen b6.
King f7. Fearless king. No, I'm going to go king h7. King h7. Just in case it makes a difference. Oh, the a5 pawn is lost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bummer.
Dominant position. All right, sounds good.
So I guess what we can say here is that the fact that the d pawn eventually going to push all the way to d6, if not to d7, make it really, really hard to stop.
Yeah.
And therefore, the defense of the e4 pawn is going to have to be abandoned at some point. Once that happens, you're going to have two connected pawns in the endgame and not much in the way of a counterplay.
Makes sense. All right, let's go back to the game.
Again, conceivably, this would have been a better defense than what he did in the game. And again, he basically kind of stubbornly played d6, kind of digging in his heels. g6. And now Pillsbury simply just pushed f5.
Kapow.
And now you can see that he's threatening multiple things. Specifically, he wants to take on g6. Once he does that, he can, after h takes g6, maybe sack on g6 a piece. I don't know, bishop or knight. Also, another thing to do would be potentially play, bishop h6, force the rook away. And once that happens, then you have a situation where something can be attacked on g6, like take, and queen g3.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of bite to that F5 move, yeah.
Yeah, F5 is basically a decisive breakthrough. You could see the computer values is at extra 5 points. Let's say you try to eliminate the pieces again here and try to go for a trade. Well, the biggest problem here is that your pawn chain is compromised on the king side. You don't really have the time to move things away, and your pawn coverage just blows up.
Yeah, right.
If you take on e6, they take probably on g6 instead, and then you've got e6 under attack, h7 under attack, h5 under attack. So,
but black has this beautiful little pyramid. They have a little pyramid there of pawns.
Yeah, it's like a tomb, you
Yeah.
get buried in the pyramid. I mean, it's good.
A tomb, yeah.
So, you can see that in this position, choices are very few in between. So he actually played, kind of give him A for consistency. He kind of set out to play A6, B5, and he's doing it. He's going for B4. He's counterattacking. F takes G6. You kind of have to take that one.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why can't you take on C3? Well, because that H7 square is not defended anymore. Rook takes F6, knight takes F6, and bishop takes F6.
Oh, look at that, yeah.
Fell, and your game fell with it. So very classical pawn storm here.
And for those of you guys listening, if you feel like we're going too fast, just pause and just try to figure out for yourself like what would happen after that. You're always welcome to pause.
Yes. So you can see here that White has broken through the castling, and now he needs to kind of like keep on pressing. His knight is under attack, but he's not paying attention to it. He goes queen h4.
Mm-hmm.
What's the idea? The idea is he just simply wants to take on d7. Once he takes on d7, queen takes on d7, he can actually take on f6 with the rook.
Right.
Bishop takes on f6, then bishop takes on f6 with a checkmate.
Super strong attack here, yeah. What is it, Kitty? I'm in the middle of a very important lesson here, Kitty.
A triple cat move coming up. Okay, so
you messed with my lighting, Kitty. This is all your fault. Now I'm darker. Oh, it looks like I got a tan or something. Okay, maybe this is good luck. All right,
so
this is going.
After b takes c, things are looking pretty rough. So he took on c3, knight takes on d7, queen takes on d7, rook takes on f6, a5 was played. What was the idea behind a5? What he's trying to do, actually, he's trying to actually lift up the rook to the a6 area to protect this sixth rank.
Mm-hmm.
Pillsbury just simply goes rook f1. There probably have been gazillion ways to win here. I actually personally thought that this was pretty cool. Bishop takes, demolishing the castle. And now, after king f7, what do we do, Ryan?
Looks like rook f1.
No. Well, actually, rook f1 probably is good too, but I think queen 8, rook f1. And now that's a cool move. Look at that move here.
Ooh, nice.
Quiet queen h5. What's the point? The point is rook e6, double check and checkmate.
Ooh, nice. Yeah.
Anyway, queen f7, rook e6, steal. Cool pin.
Cool one, yeah.
So, what transpired in the game after rook 8 to f1?
You sure picked some exciting games. These are great.
Rook 1 to a6 is trying to support the defense. A fair play.
Sure.
But, you can kind of see on the sadness of this position, if you count, well, how much did White sacrifice to get such a great position? The answer is nothing.
Yeah, right.
He's not really down anything. So you're getting bonded here for absolutely no reason. So he takes on g6, and now you once again threatened with mate on h7. So you don't have any choice. Rook f6 is too late. If you take on f6, you just get mated.
Phew. Wow. Mm-hmm.
So what do you do? Well, you're going to have to take the bishop.
Yep.
And he takes on f8. Bishop takes f8. And now, looks like white has not succeeded in a checkmating play. Well, what do we do now? Yes, we did succeed. Check.
Mm-hmm.
Check again.
Mm-hmm.
Check again.
Perpetual. Oh, not a perpetual. Free queen.
Not a
Woohoo.
perpetual. Now, this brings me to the point. Was that any better? No.
Checkmate. Yeah.
Is king e8 a better move? No.
Also checkmate. Look at that.
Also. So
Yeah.
he kind of has to give up the queen. He doesn't really have a lot of choices. And now, unfortunately, he can't do anything about the take on b2. Like, if he actually could sneak away here and get the pawn promoted, but unfortunately, he can't even do that.
Yeah. Right. Just perfectly in time. Well, c3. C3, maybe the
Actually,
pawns can run.
actually, better yet from that angle.
Yeah. Checkmating too. Yeah.
Checking it into. So you can see poor guy just got demolished, and a very classical attack of Pillsbury Knight with a subsequent Kingside Storm. This is how this variation works ideally. Now, when you play against a really good player, they're going to take some precautions here. And one of the greatest precautions that I always say, when the knight comes to e5, don't waste time. Just trade this thing right away before this pile of pieces lines up against your king. Because when they do, it's going to be too late. Like if we go all the way back here and ask ourselves what black could have done in this position here, had he actually not played c4, but let's say took,
Mm-hmm.
and played, for instance, knight e4 here, would he be able to survive? I think so.
This would have been
Because
more resilient. Yeah. Yeah.
the big difference here is that the pawn setup is a lot more resilient, and taking on e4 is not going to get you anything else, because now if you go knight d5, you can swap the knight. If you go queen d6, trying to get the pass pawn going, you're probably going to have a hard time keeping that pawn, because they're going to counterattack you here and then insert the bishop in d3 and separate that pawn from the rest of your crew.
I guess one question I have about the Pillsbury Knight thing is pawn to f6 a good way to refute it at some point? Pawn f6.
Oh, you mean for black to
Yeah.
keep the knight from e5?
Well, once it goes to e5, is pawn f6 at some point a good defense to that?
Yes, but then you need to move your knight somewhere. The big question is, what do you do with your own knight?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where that is a critical question. Like here, even in this position, maybe something like knight e8 is better, but not allowing all of that stuff pile up. Once the queen gets to f3, it becomes very challenging, because any take on e5, d takes e5. The d pawn is going to have a hard time being defended.
Right. Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
And it's even more especially difficult when you got a whole bunch of pieces pointed up on your king.
Yeah.
Now you can't really do anything. You don't have the time to regroup. It's too late.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
Was h6 any better? Could he play h6? Possibly so, but you can. This is again a classical sack, and then rook f3, an ugly rook lift coming up.
Whew. That's beautiful, rook lift. What are you talking about? Beautiful.
Yeah, you could play knight e4, trying to kind of cover your tracks here, but knight d7, knight e4, just about any move wins. Basically, anything that can be done here wins.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, I would go with something simple like this.
Sure.
Check, king h7, and then I don't know, knight takes.
Sure. Yeah.
How bad can that be? He has to go somewhere, and then I take on f8, and if you go rook g8, queen f5 check, king back, knight e5, looks awful.
Yeah. All right, I've seen enough. This has been
Enough.
terrific. Well, what's the final summary then?
Final summary is, in a Queen's Gambit, the knight e5, the Pillsbury Knight attack can be very successful if you have time to put the knight to e5. You immediately support with f4. Now, the next step would be to play Queen f3 to take d5 and e4 squares under control. And if you're black, don't let this stuff pile up. The moment the knight arrives to a5, think about how you're going to trade this thing as soon as possible before the rest of the pieces join it.